My pregnant sister moved into my house illegally, and my whole family took her side. They called me cruel when I went to court to get back what was mine. I never imagined I'd be writing something like this. I always thought my family was close, not perfect, but solid enough that something like this wouldn't happen. And yet here I am, 29 years old, sitting in my hotel room on the other side of town, locked out of the house I worked a decade to afford, because my own parents decided it belonged to someone else. I work in operations consulting. Long hours, frequent travel. It's the kind of job that people outside the industry don't always understand. My parents certainly didn't. They saw the business trips, the hotel stays, and assumed I was just drifting or not settling down. What they didn't see were the spreadsheets at 1 a.m., the missed holidays, the exhaustion I wore like a second skin for years so I could save enough to buy a home on my own. 2 years ago, I closed on a classic 4-bedroom in a quiet suburb outside Milwaukee. The house wasn't huge, but it was mine. Every inch was paid for with long nights, skipped vacations, and careful planning. I loved that house. I painted the walls myself, replaced the fixtures, grew tomatoes in the backyard. It became my place of peace, even if I wasn't there full-time. Enter my younger sister, Ray. Ray is 26, married to Tanner, and very pregnant. She's the baby of the family and was always treated like one. Growing up, Ray had a handful of chronic health issues that understandably earned her a lot of attention. That dynamic never really changed. My parents still see her as vulnerable, even though she's healthy now and perfectly capable of managing her own life. She and Tanner were living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't ideal, especially with a baby on the way, but they'd made that choice. Tanner's income was unreliable, he's bounced between various freelance gigs, and Ray had been working part-time at a local daycare. They weren't saving much, but it never seemed urgent until suddenly it was. Over the winter, my parents started dropping subtle comments. Ray needs more space, poor thing. You're never really in your house, are you? It's such a shame all those rooms are sitting empty. At first, I thought it was just guilt-tripping. My family's always had a weird relationship with boundaries and expectations. I told them kindly but firmly, I love you all, but I'm not loaning out my house. It's my home, not a guest house. They didn't argue. They just nodded and let the conversation drift. I should have seen that as a red flag. Fast forward to March. I was on a 3-week assignment in Vancouver, normal client rollout, nothing unusual. About 10 days in, I got a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Halstead, who's in her 70s and watches the street like it's her personal soap opera. Hi dear. Everything okay? I saw movers at your place yesterday. Just wanted to check in. Thought you weren't planning to sell? I stopped breathing for a full 10 seconds. Movers? I immediately called my mom. Hi sweetie, she said, overly cheerful. What's going on at my house? I asked. There was a pause. Oh, you heard already, she said, as if I'd gotten an early birthday surprise. We didn't want to worry you while you were working. Ray and Tanner moved in. Isn't that great? They needed somewhere to go, and it just made so much sense. I was silent. Not out of calm, but because I was stunned into it. You let them move into my house? I said slowly. Well, it's not like you're using it, she said lightly. You're always gone. Ray's due next month and needed to get settled. And your house has 4 bedrooms. 4, Clara. It's silly for all that space to sit empty. My dad chimed in the background. We thought you'd understand. You travel too much to really appreciate it anyway. They made it sound so logical. So inevitable. Like I was being unreasonable for not seeing the obvious solution to someone else's problem. I told them, clearly, that's my house. You had no right. Don't be so dramatic, my mom said. It's not like they're selling it. They just need it for a while. I hung up and caught the first flight home the next morning. When I got there, my key still worked. But everything else had changed. There was a new welcome mat. Diaper boxes stacked in the foyer. Ray and Tanner's coats hanging by the door. It didn't smell like my house, it smelled like someone else's life had taken root. Ray greeted me like I was the one visiting. I didn't think you'd come back so soon, she said, smiling nervously. But I'm so glad you did. Come see the baby's room. It's the one with the best light. She had set up the nursery in what used to be my home office. She'd painted over the walls I'd chosen. Tanner's tools were in the garage. Their dog was sleeping on my couch. I stood there, absorbing the fact that I'd lost control of something I owned because my family had decided it wasn't really mine anymore. I need you both to leave, I said. Ray's face crumbled. But I'm 34 weeks pregnant. I can't move again now. The stress could hurt the baby. Mom said. This isn't about Mom, I cut in. This is about you and Tanner living in my house without asking. Tanner entered from the kitchen. We didn't think you'd mind. You're barely here. We've been keeping the place clean and fixing up a few things. We even mowed the lawn last week. I didn't ask you to, I said, shaking. He shrugged. You should really try to be more flexible. Family's supposed to help each other. That's when it clicked. They genuinely thought they were entitled to stay. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my own guest bedroom, now filled with Ray's maternity gear, trying to wrap my head around what had happened. It wasn't just the physical intrusion. It was the betrayal. My family had decided that Ray's needs outweighed my rights, and they didn't even think I'd mind. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Daniel Wexler, a calm, unflinching type with the energy of someone who had seen too many cases just like mine. You're not alone, he told me after I explained the situation. Unfortunately, what you're describing is common. A family member gets comfortable, calls it temporary, and suddenly you're the villain for wanting your life back. He asked a dozen questions. Was the house in my name? Yes. Did they have a lease or any written agreement? No. Had I given permission? Absolutely not. Then he said the words that made me breathe again. You have the law on your side. But there was a catch. Because they've moved in with keys you provided your parents, and have been there for over a week, the eviction process will be formal. You can't just kick them out. You'll need to file, notify them, and let it run through court. I nodded, numb. How long will it take? 2 to 3 months if they cooperate. Longer if they fight it. And they did fight it. I served them the first legal notice that week. When Ray saw the papers, she looked at me like I'd slapped her. You're seriously evicting us, she whispered. You're in my house without permission. I'm your sister, she said, like that changed the facts. Tanner, meanwhile, became openly hostile. Good luck looking good in court, he said. Pregnant woman. Newborn on the way. Judges hate landlords who put babies on the street. It made my skin crawl how rehearsed that line sounded. That evening, I got the first phone call from my mom. Clara, she began, this has gone far enough. I'm just enforcing my rights. You're punishing your sister for needing help. That house is big enough for all of you. It's my house, I said. And I never said they could live there. She's about to have a baby, Mom snapped. Have some compassion. It escalated quickly. Within days, I was getting calls from other family members, cousins, uncles, even my godmother. All of them had heard some version of the story, that I was being cold, calculating, spiteful. Ray had posted a vague but emotionally charged message on Facebook that didn't mention me by name but included enough context to unleash the wrath of people who had no idea what was actually happening. I kept screenshots. All of it. Daniel said to document everything. You need a clear paper trail that they were unauthorized occupants, that you took the correct legal steps, and that they're trying to manipulate public sympathy. Don't engage. Just observe. So I observed. I watched Ray cry in Instagram stories while holding her stomach. I watched old friends comment things like, you deserve better, and family should be there when it matters most. I watched my own parents like those posts. The worst part? I wasn't sure they were trying to hurt me. I think they genuinely believed they were doing the right thing for Ray. When I confronted my dad, he said as much. Ray's had a harder time in life. You've always been self-sufficient, Clara. You'll be fine. She won't. That doesn't make it okay to take my home. He sighed. You're too focused on property. What about people? I am focused on people, I said, voice shaking. Which is why I can't believe you chose to lie to me, undermine me, and stand by while someone else moved into my house. They didn't apologize. They just stopped returning my calls. In court filings, Ray and Tanner tried to argue they had implied permission based on what my parents had told them. Their lawyer submitted photos of the baby's nursery, testimonials from my mother, and statements about Ray's medical needs. Meanwhile, Daniel and I built our case on facts: the deed, the utilities, my travel schedule, the documented refusal, and the records of previous conversations. I even submitted the text from Mrs. Halstead confirming the exact date they moved in, proof that I had no prior notice. But I knew that facts don't always win hearts. Outside the courtroom, public perception was brutal. I was painted as the career-obsessed daughter who abandoned her family. Even some people at work had seen Ray's posts. I kept quiet, but I could feel the shift in how people looked at me. The only ones who knew the full story were the judge and Daniel. Then came the hearing. I showed up with my documents and timeline. Ray arrived in a maternity dress, crying before she even entered the room. Tanner wore a jacket and a smug expression. My parents sat behind them, stone-faced. The judge listened. He read the files. Asked pointed questions. Clarified dates. Then he turned to Ray and said, "Did your sister ever directly tell you it was okay to move in?" Ray looked down. "No," she admitted. "But I assumed." "Did she ever give you keys?" "No. My parents did." The judge nodded slowly. "Emotion is not ownership," he said. "You do not have the right to occupy property without the consent of the legal owner, regardless of family relationship. This is a matter of law, not sympathy." And just like that, it was over. He gave them 30 days to leave. The ruling should have brought peace. Closure. At the very least, a clear path forward. But all it did was light a match. That night, Ray posted again, this time, a tearful video cradling her newborn. Laurel had been born just days before the court hearing. The timing couldn't have been worse. Ray made sure to highlight that fact. She didn't mention my name, but everyone knew. "This isn't about money," she said into the camera. "It's about kindness. My baby doesn't have a home because of a misunderstanding that could have been resolved with love." The comments exploded. "No sister would do that. Heartless. That baby deserved better. Some people forget where they came from." I turned off my phone. Daniel had warned me this would happen. They're losing legally, so they're shifting to public perception. Let it pass. You have what you need. Still, it was hard not to let it in. Former co-workers messaged me to ask what was going on. Friends who had been distant for months reappeared to offer backhanded comfort. Even my old college roommate texted, "Just saw Ray's post. You good?" I wanted to scream. But I stayed quiet. The one thing that kept me grounded was the house. My house. After the hearing, I gave Ray and Tanner space to pack. I didn't want to be in the house while they were still there, so I spent those weeks in a short-term rental. It was small, quiet, and suffocating. But it was clean and mine. I visited occasionally to gather a few items. Each time, more of Ray's things had taken over. Baby clothes drying in the bathroom. Empty bottles in the sink. A bassinet in the corner of my room. They weren't just living there. They were settling in. When I asked how the packing was going, Ray looked at me like I'd kicked her. "It's hard," she said. "We don't have anywhere lined up yet." "You had a month," I said. The court was clear. "I thought maybe you'd change your mind. After Laurel was born." I blinked. "Ray, no. You don't get to stake a claim on something just because it's convenient." She didn't reply. Tanner didn't come out of the bedroom. The day they left, I didn't speak to them. I arrived at the house hours after they were gone. The key was left in the mailbox. A note sat on the kitchen counter. "We did our best to take care of your home. Sorry if it wasn't enough." I threw it away without reading the rest. What they left behind wasn't exactly vandalism, but it wasn't respectful either. Walls scuffed. Drawers jammed. Furniture out of place. The nursery they'd built still had decals on the wall and a faint scent of baby powder. I walked room by room, unsure how to feel. Grief? Anger? Relief? I didn't know. Over the next few weeks, I put the house back together. I repainted. Replaced light bulbs. Rearranged the furniture the way I liked it. I had the floors professionally cleaned and donated anything Ray had left behind that wasn't personal. The physical transformation was easy. The emotional one took longer. Friends started trickling back into my life. A few even apologized. "I had no idea what actually happened," one of them said. the way Ray made it sound. I know, I replied, but didn't elaborate. It wasn't my job to correct every narrative anymore. Even some family members came around. My aunt, my mother's sister, called one evening. She had seen the court documents, heard from Ray directly, and decided she'd had enough. I just want to say you were right, she told me. None of this was fair. You don't owe anyone your home. It meant more than I expected. Then my grandmother called. She was quiet for a moment. Then said, I never thought I'd see the day your parents would choose ease over integrity. I did, I said. She exhaled. Well, now you know where everyone stands. That's a kind of gift, too. I started to sleep through the night again. The calls slowed. The messages dwindled. Eventually, Ray deleted the video. I never got an apology. Not from my parents, who still haven't acknowledged their role in any of this. Not from Ray, who's since moved in with Tanner's relatives out of state. Not from Tanner, who, last I heard, was telling people I forced them into homelessness. But I stopped needing one. Because the house was mine again, not just legally, but emotionally. I felt it every time I made coffee in my kitchen, opened a window, or locked the door behind me at night. I had taken back something they tried to claim as theirs. Not out of cruelty. Not out of pride. Out of survival. Once the dust settled, I didn't return to life exactly as it had been. I couldn't. Something in me had shifted. I'd always considered myself strong, but this ordeal made me recognize another kind of strength, not the resilience to push through, but the clarity to stop accommodating. That was new for me. The house was the physical proof of that change. Every time I walked through the door, I was reminded that boundaries matter even with the people who share your DNA. Especially with them. My job, somehow, hadn't suffered. In fact, a few weeks after Ray moved out, I got called into a meeting with my director. She'd heard bits and pieces of what I'd gone through from HR and a close colleague I trusted. Whatever happened, she said gently, the way you handled it with discretion and professionalism was noticed. I didn't expect what came next. She offered me a regional promotion, more pay, more flexibility, and, crucially, the ability to work remotely 3 months out of the year. I accepted. Later that night, I sat on my couch in my house, drinking wine and watching the sun filter through the windows I'd once feared I'd lose. I couldn't remember the last time I felt that much peace. Around that time, I got another unexpected call. From Ray. Her voice was quieter. Measured. Not the tearful guilt or passive aggression I'd grown used to, but uncertainty. I just wanted to say, she began, I didn't understand before. What it means to have your space. And lose it. I didn't say anything. I live with Tanner's parents now. They have rules. I have no say in anything. I have to ask before I put anything on the wall. I have to keep the baby quiet. I have no privacy. And suddenly, I get it. I let her keep talking. I'm sorry, she said finally. For everything. For moving in. For assuming. For dragging it out. You were right. I didn't think about what it cost you. I only saw what I wanted. The silence hung for a beat. I appreciate you calling, I said. It means something. We didn't solve everything in that moment. It wasn't a full reconciliation. But it was a step. A real one. My parents, though? That was a different story. They still hadn't said a word about the court, or the eviction, or their role in orchestrating the entire situation. But they had started calling again. Little messages here and there. How's work? Thinking of you. Miss you. Come by soon. I ignored them at first. Then I sent one reply. We don't move forward until you acknowledge what happened. Not just with Ray. With you. No response came. And that was okay. I stopped needing them to understand. I stopped waiting for the apology that might never come. Instead, I started focusing on the people who had shown up. My friends, who helped repaint the baby's room back into my office without asking for anything. My neighbor, Mrs. Halstead, who brought cookies and said, "You handled that with more grace than I would have." My team at work, who cheered me on quietly but consistently. I stopped defining family by blood. I started defining it by presence. In the fall, my grandmother passed away. It was peaceful. Expected. But the aftermath wasn't. At the reading of her will, I learned she changed her estate plans. Her house, our old family home, wasn't going to be split among her children. It was left entirely to me. I was stunned. My uncle looked visibly confused. My mother's face turned pale. There was a note attached to the file that the lawyer read aloud, written in my grandmother's handwriting. Clara, of all the people in this family, you're the one who's shown me what it means to protect what you've earned. You didn't do what was easy. You did what was right. That home deserves someone who understands its value. I walked out of that room with tears in my eyes. Not because of the inheritance, but because someone saw me. Really saw me. That home wasn't just a house. It was a message. I still live in my own house, the one Ray and Tanner tried to take. But now I split my time between the two properties, mine and the one my grandmother gave me. Sometimes, I think back to that first phone call from my mother when she told me Ray had moved in. How quickly they made that decision. How casually they dismissed my voice. They thought I'd let it go. They thought I'd roll over, make peace, and let it all happen for the sake of family. But they didn't realize that family without respect isn't family at all. It's been just over a year since the day I walked into my house and realized someone else had made it theirs. I remember every moment of it, the disbelief, the cold knot in my stomach, the way Ray smiled like she was doing me a favor. It feels like a memory from someone else's life now. Like I watched it happen to a stranger on a screen. But it was real. And what it taught me changed everything. The obvious lesson was legal: keep documentation, don't give out keys loosely, and even family needs paper trails. But the deeper lesson was emotional: boundaries matter. You don't need to justify why something is yours. You don't need to soften your no when someone calls it selfish. No is a full sentence. I used to think being the reliable one in the family meant bending. Being quiet. Absorbing. Now I know better. Being reliable doesn't mean being available for exploitation. A few months ago, I adopted a dog. Her name is June. She's older, slow, and incredibly affectionate. She follows me from room to room and curls up by my feet when I work. I never realized how much I needed that small, consistent presence. Sometimes, I sit on the porch with her, coffee in hand, and just breathe. No threats. No tension. No expectations lurking just beneath the surface. Peace, earned, not given. My parents are still in my life, but from a distance. I see them at holidays. I answer their calls once every few weeks. The conversations are polite, short, and carefully curated. We haven't had the conversation, and I don't think we ever will. They've chosen silence over accountability. That used to make me angry. Now it just makes me sad. But I've learned that relationships can survive without closeness, and some are better off that way. Ray and I have stayed in light contact. She texts occasionally. Baby pictures, mostly. She asks how June is. I ask how Laurel's sleeping. It's distant, but peaceful. We both know what happened, and we both know it changed us. That's enough for now. Every month, when I pay the mortgage on my house, I smile. Because I can. Because no one else is trying to take it. Because the locks are mine. The name on the deed is mine. The work that bought it was mine. Because I fought for something that mattered. I think we don't talk enough about how hard it is to stand up to your own family. To tell the people who raised you, this is not okay. To risk being labeled difficult, dramatic, cold, just because you protected yourself. But I'll say this, if I hadn't stood firm, I'd have lost more than a house. I'd have lost myself. So here's what I learned, what I wish someone had told me years ago. Ownership is more than legal. It's emotional. It's psychological. And it's worth defending. Family does not mean forfeiture. Blood doesn't override boundaries. Ever. You are not selfish for saying no, especially when that no protects your peace. If someone's love is conditional on what you give them, it's not love, it's leverage. You don't have to explain your worth. Anyone who demands that explanation is already ignoring it. I didn't just take back my house. I took back my voice. I took back my space. I took back my freedom to decide who gets access to my life, and on what terms. And now, every time I sit on my couch, walk through my kitchen, or fall asleep in my bed, I feel the weight of something I didn't have before. Not just peace, but pride. Because I stood up when it mattered. And I won. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.